February 4, 2024. In a small, peaceful village in the Tumakuru district of Karnataka, India, where the red dirt roads still cling to a peaceful pace of life and the old tiled roofs, people seem to have nothing but rice fields and traditional festivals. However, right after a seemingly warm birthday party, the body of a young man is found floating on the surface of a lake amidst the morning mist. The victim is Manjunath, a gentle, simple husband, once loved by the whole village. No one expected that behind that mysterious death was a cold and deliberate murder plan, masterminded by his wife, Harshitha. And what's more heartbreaking is that she was not alone. Her lover and their group of friends were involved in a carefully calculated plot that lasted for months. What turned a marriage of only 11 months into a cold-blooded tragedy? Who opened the door to hell in that house? Let's dive into this haunting case right away. Manjunath is a simple man, living in Sinapanahali village, Tumakuru district, Karnataka state. He lost his parents at a very young age, growing up under the protection of his aunt, who raised him like her own son. Without a high education, without a prestigious job, Manjunath chose to live a quiet and kind life. He worked under contract in an industrial kitchen, specializing in cooking for local projects or events. Despite his modest income, he always tried to build a stable and fulfilling life within his ability. Manjunath is gentle, quiet, but is known as a devoted husband. When he married Harshitha less than a year ago, everyone in the village congratulated him. Everyone believed that he had finally found a home after a childhood lacking in love. Harshitha, Manjunath's wife, was initially seen as a gentle, cheerful, educated, and lovely-looking woman. She lived with her husband in a small house next to her aunt, the mother of Raghu, Manjunath's distant cousin. However, after living together, Harshitha began to develop feelings for her husband's cousin, Raghu, who was a few years younger than Manjunath and lived next door. The two often met and talked when Manjunath was at work. Their intimacy gradually exceeded the limit, and eventually it became a secret affair. At first, they kept it a secret. But later, the desire for freedom and the desire to possess made Harshitha start to think of a radical solution: eliminate her honest husband from her life. Manjunath was unaware of the affair. He continued to work hard, send money home, prepare for a baby, believing that he was building a happy family. Harshitha, on the other hand, was still a good wife on the outside, but on the inside, she was hatching a dark plot. The three of them living together, husband, wife, and lover, became a smoldering fire. Behind the smiles, there were secret messages, furtive glances, and a murder plan was hatched step by step. Just a few months after the wedding, Harshitha began to show signs of change. She often used headaches, sleepiness, and stress as excuses to avoid intimacy with her husband. The conversations between the couple became less frequent and cold. Manjunath, with his gentle and unsuspecting nature, simply assumed that his wife was tired. However, during that time, the relationship between Harshitha and Raghu grew stronger. At first, it was conversations through the window of the house next door. Then there were secret meetings when Manjunath was at work. They texted each other on the phone, using secret symbols like HR to express their feelings, hidden signs that no one noticed, except Manjunath herself. Around December 2023, Manjunath began to notice something was wrong. He noticed that Harshitha often locked her phone, often snuck into the bathroom to answer the phone, and often seemed startled when someone entered the room. One time he saw Raghu coming out of the kitchen, where only his wife usually went, and the two of them seemed awkward. Although he did not dare to come to a conclusion, the husband's intuition spoke up. He told this story to his aunt, who was Raghu's mother. She seemed embarrassed, only advising him not to wrongly accuse his wife. Manjunath kept quiet, but from that day on, he began to record unusual things, hoping to have evidence to clarify everything. Later investigations revealed an unsent message on Manjunath's phone, written to a close friend. "I suspect something is wrong. Maybe they are hiding something from me." The message was never sent, perhaps because he was still hesitating. He still believed that Harshitha could change. He did not expect that the person he once loved with all his heart was plotting day by day, hour by hour to eliminate him once and for all. In the shadow of betrayal, Harshitha and Raghu began to plot Manjunath's murder. It was more than just an affair. They wanted all the property, the house, and the freedom to live together as a legitimate couple. She wanted to erase the past, erase her gentle husband, at all costs. The two began to recruit accomplices, 7 in total. All of them were Raghu's friends. They prepared a strangulation rope, sleeping pills, a fake crime scene scenario, and even fabricated text messages to throw the police off guard. And then, the time was chosen. The night of a husband's birthday, a place no one expected to be his last. On the evening of February 3, 2024, the small house in Sinapanahalli village was filled with a birthday atmosphere. Manjunath, though quiet and not used to parties, still tried to prepare a simple meal to celebrate her new age. Harshitha smiled and poured orange juice for her husband. She hugged him and took a selfie like a happy wife. But only she and Raghu knew, tonight was the end. Around 10 p.m., Manjunath began to feel dizzy. His head was spinning, his vision was getting blurry. There was something in the orange juice. He could not stand and staggered into the bedroom. Harshitha helped him to bed, gently placing her hand on his forehead, as if caring for him. But that was just the beginning of a planned crime. When the house was dark and quiet, Raghu and his 6 friends quietly approached from the back door, just as planned. The door was already opened by Harshitha. She stood in the living room, calm as if everything was in place. Manjunath was still breathing, lying unconscious on the bed. But when Raghu and his accomplices burst into the room, he immediately woke up in a panic. "What? What? Who are you?" His voice trembled, his eyes lost in the shadows of the night. Not giving him a second to understand, 2 of the group pressed his hands down, another tightened the rope around his neck. Manjunath struggled, scratched, but he was too weak. The anesthetic was still in his blood. In the last moment, his eyes fell on Harshitha's face, who was standing right at the door, silently watching. No crying, no screaming, just silence, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Why, is it you?" Manjunath tried to say, but his voice was only a ragged breath. A few minutes later, he was lying motionless, completely dead. Not stopping there, the group of perpetrators began to fake the scene. They stuffed the drug package into the victim's pants pocket, then carried his body to a nearby lake, just a few hundred meters from the house. Under the cover of darkness and thick fog, they pushed his body into the water, pretending that he had died of drug overdose and fallen into the lake. Harshitha returned home, cleaned up all traces, and sent a text message to her husband's phone. "I'm waiting for you to come home. Call me." A ploy to pretend that she had no idea what was going on. Everything was arranged, seemingly perfect. But what they didn't expect, a small detail in the selfie that night would expose everything. Early in the morning of February 4, 2024, the fog was still thick on the surface of the village lake. A group of villagers passing by the water to go to the fields suddenly discovered something strange floating near the water's edge. At first, they thought it was a garbage bag, but when they got closer, "Oh my God, a dead person," one person shouted. It was the body of Manjunath, eyes wide open, body stiff in the cold water. The clothes were still intact, but there were purple bruises on the neck, contrary to the hypothesis of drowning or drug overdose. The bad news spread quickly. Within minutes, the whole village gathered, and shortly after, the Kunigal police arrived. When investigators arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed something unusual. There were no signs of struggling in the water. There was no foam in the mouth, the basic features of a drowning. But there was clearly a strangulation mark on the neck, and this could not have been accidental. The preliminary forensic team determined the victim did not die from the water, but died before being thrown into the lake. There were abrasions on the arms, indicating a struggle. There was a small package of drugs in the pocket, Too obvious and illogical for someone like Manjunath, who had no history of using illegal substances. Harshitha, upon hearing the news, cried and rolled out in front of the house, shouting that her husband had been harmed by bad people. She immediately pretended to call him, sending heartbreaking messages to create the perfect cover. "Why did you leave me? We were laughing and talking together last night," she screamed and collapsed into the arms of an aunt, playing the role of a widow. But in that seemingly complete pain, a small detail caught the police's eye. On the victim's phone, there was still a selfie taken the night before. In the photo, Harshitha raised her right hand to form the letter HR, a seemingly meaningless symbol, but later became the key to uncovering the entire murder plot. At the Tumakuru District Mortuary, the first forensic report clarified important facts. Time of death, around 10:30 p.m. on February 3, 2024. Cause of death, asphyxiation, due to strangulation with a soft rope, not drowning. There were circular bruises on the neck indicating intentional action, not an accident. There were scratches and abrasions on the arms, signs that the victim had resisted to the end. The forensic doctor concluded, the victim was dead before falling into the water. The body was thrown into the water to distract attention. This was a calculated murder. The police searched Manjunath's phone, and it was here that a selfie finally turned out to be a valuable clue. In the photo, Harshitha was smiling but had drawn the letters HR in lipstick on her palm, then absent-mindedly extended her hand toward the camera. But the coincidence was the photo had been taken just minutes before her death. The investigators immediately had questions. What was HR? Was Harshitha sending a signal to an accomplice? A phone number search began. The call logs from that night revealed several names who had been in constant contact with Harshitha before and after the crime. One of them was Raghu, her cousin and next-door neighbor. The police began to summon Harshitha and Raghu for questioning. Initially, Harshitha appeared extremely distressed. "I don't know what happened. That night he drank orange juice and went to bed. I slept in the living room." However, when confronted with phone log, HR photo, message history recovered from SIM card, small bloodstains on the bedroom floor, even though thoroughly cleaned, she began to waver. Her testimony was inconsistent. She was sweating. Her story kept changing. The police made a decisive move. "We have cameras outside the lake that captured 4 men carrying something at 2 a.m. Harshitha's face paled. Finally, she collapsed. She collapsed on the investigation table and confessed the whole plan. She had come up with the idea. Raghu recruited 5 more friends. She drugged her husband's orange juice. When Manjunath became weak, the gang broke in, killed him, and dumped his body in the lake. The drugs were a ploy to distract the investigation. Based on the testimony and electronic evidence, the police arrested a total of 7 people. Harshitha, the mastermind; Raghu, the lover and direct accomplice; 5 friends in the group who helped commit the crime and dispose of the body. At the police station, the group was escorted one by one. No one said a word. Only Raghu's eyes, looking at Harshitha as if blaming her. Could it be that the love they painted was just an excuse to destroy a gentle husband who unfortunately stood in the wrong place? On April 15, 2024, the Tumakuru District Court held the first hearing in the case of Harshitha and Raghu murdering Manjunath, a case that shocked the entire state of Karnataka, causing public outrage because of the cold-blooded and vicious nature of the killers. In the trial, Harshitha and Raghu were tried for conspiracy to murder, causing death by organized strangulation, disposing of the body, creating a false crime scene, misleading the investigating agency. The remaining 5 accomplices were tried for their roles in aiding and abetting the murder and concealing the crime. The court heard Harshita's entire statement, copies of text messages, call records, HR photos, and forensic reports. There was no evidence to dispute the crime. The crime was clear. In court, Raghu's foster aunt Manjunath, also his mother, choked with tears. I raised both of them as my own children, yet the one I raised as my nephew had the heart to kill the other, to steal his wife. I lost both of them." The courtroom fell silent. No one dared to look directly at her, the old hunched woman, now standing silently between two streams of blood and two pains that could never be healed. After weeks of trial and careful consideration, the court sentenced Harshitha, life imprisonment without reduction, fine of 5,000 rupees, recorded as the mastermind with the highest degree of coldness and treachery. Raghu, life imprisonment, increased fine to 10,000 rupees for direct involvement in the crime. The remaining 5 accomplices, sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison depending on their level of involvement. One person had his sentence reduced for his honest confession. The entire house where the crime took place was sealed. The case became a major lesson in the local criminal investigation industry and was included in a typical report on organized murder within the family. Yet after the verdict, questions still hang silently. Did Harshitha really love Raghu, or was she just using him as a tool? If Raghu had not been arrested, would he have continued to love Harshitha? Why did no one in the group stop? Not even one. No one knows. Only the dead cannot speak. Manjunath died in an unjust manner, taking with him the faith in a home he had built with his whole life. He was not a perfect husband, nor a rich or shrewd man, but he was gentle, kind, and loved his wife with all his heart, and that made him the victim of a very cruel tragedy. Harshitha, Raghu, and their accomplices have now been punished. But can the law mend the wounds in the heart of a mother who has lost both her grandchild and her son? Or soothe the pain of a small village where everyone thought they knew their neighbors but were blind to the evil that was brewing? There is more to this case than greed. There is betrayal. There is love twisted. There are moral boundaries blurred by instant gratification. It is a reminder of trusting without blind faith, of listening to your instincts, and of the value of kindness in a world that can be cruel. Some people don't die because they were murdered. They die because they loved the wrong person and trusted the wrong person. The story is over, but its lesson remains for each of us.